Operation Sindoor wasn't just a military strike. It was a psychological event. What began as a 23-minute attack by India on alleged terrorist infrastructure quickly spiraled into something much larger, a full-blown war of narratives. Almost instantly, competing versions of the truth flooded the airwaves, newspapers, and social media timelines. On one hand, India portrayed the action as precise and necessary, aimed at eliminating threats with surgical accuracy. On the other, Pakistan framed the operation as reckless aggression, claiming civilian deaths and religious sites being hit. And while missiles may strike the ground, it's the story people believe that leaves a lasting impact. But how do these competing stories take root so quickly? And more importantly, how does the media shape what we believe, often without us realizing it? To understand this, we need to step back and look not just at what happened during Operation Sindoor, but how it was communicated. The real battleground wasn't just in Kashmir or Islamabad. It was inside the mind. And that brings us to the role of legacy media. Legacy media has long claimed to inform the public, but in moments of crisis, it can just as easily mislead. The first and most obvious way this happens is through speed. When a story breaks, especially one involving war, media outlets scramble to publish before their competitors. But in this rush, accuracy often becomes a secondary concern. Sources go unverified. Headlines are crafted for impact and not clarity. And information that's speculative or incomplete is broadcast as though it's fact. This isn't necessarily about lies, it's about framing. Legacy media knows its audience and subtly shapes its content to appeal to their beliefs and emotions. In India, this meant presenting the operation as a clean, justified military action. In Pakistan, it meant focusing on the alleged civilian toll and questioning India's motives. These aren't just editorial choices, they're psychological strategies. Every headline, every image, every quote is designed to push you towards a particular conclusion. And once that narrative has taken hold, even undeniable facts have a hard time breaking through. So while it's tempting to think of misinformation as something that happens on social media or fringe blogs, some of the most powerful distortions come from the mainstream. And Operation Sindoor gives us a striking example of how that works in practice. As soon as the operation ended, the spin began. Indian news networks were quick to emphasize the precision of the strike, highlighting its short duration, its carefully chosen targets, and its supposed avoidance of civilian areas. Military analysts filled studio panels, praising the restraint and professionalism of the Indian forces. Maps were drawn, graphics were animated, and the message was clear. This was a necessary move in the fight against terrorism, as it perfectly should have been. But if you flipped the channel across the border, the story was entirely different. Pakistani outlets broadcast emotional interviews, grainy videos of burning structures, and official statements condemning the attack. Claims of civilian deaths, including those at religious sites, were pushed to the forefront. Some of these reports turned out to be based on recycled footage or unverified images. But by then, the damage was already done. The perception had set in. Misinformation did not escape the Indian side either. Days after the strike, as the conflict escalated, videos and headlines of fake news about Karachi port, Islamabad, and many other areas being, quote, completely destroyed, were published by the Indian legacy media. And this was not just about the facts. It was about the emotional tonality. In India, the tone was pride. In Pakistan, it was outrage. Both played to the fears, beliefs, and loyalties of their audiences. And because these stories were being delivered by trusted national media, they were not questioned. They were simply absorbed. And this is where the psychology steps in. And it's crucial to understand how our brains respond when the media plays to our emotions. The way we process news isn't as rational as we'd like to think. Our brains are wired for efficiency, not accuracy, and this is especially true during crises. When we're bombarded with emotionally charged stories, Whether they evoke fear, anger, or patriotism, we become more reactive and less critical. This is why emotional framing is so effective. Stories that make us feel something are more likely to be remembered and believed. There's also the illusory truth effect, which says that the more often we hear something, the more likely we are to believe it, even if we know it's false. So if a claim is repeated across channels or shared by multiple sources, it starts to feel real. Add to that our tendency towards confirmation bias, and you have the perfect storm. We seek out information that confirms what we already believe and avoid what challenges it. That's why two people can see the same event and come away with completely different interpretations. And perhaps most importantly, there's our craving for certainty. In moments of chaos, we don't want ambiguity, we want answers. Even if those answers are wrong, they give us a sense of control. That's why misinformation spreads so quickly during high-stakes events like Operation Sindoor and the conflict that followed it. It doesn't just fill a gap in knowledge, it satisfies an emotional need. Before we talk about how to protect ourselves from misinformation, let's pause for a quick Psychology 101. What you need to understand is this. Our brains didn't evolve to process 24/7 news cycles, mass media, or information warfare. We evolved to survive in small social groups, where trusting authority figures, reacting quickly to danger, and going with the group were usually good strategies. But in today's media environment, those same instincts can betray us. Let's start with Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel Prize-winning psychologist who distinguished between two systems of thinking in his book, Thinking, Fast and Slow. System 1 is fast, automatic, and emotional, and System 2 is slow, deliberate, and logical. When we scroll the news or see a shocking headline, we're usually operating in System 1. We react, we click, and we share. And that's exactly what misinformation exploits. It hijacks our fast-thinking brain before the slow-thinking one ever gets involved. Then there's Leon Festinger's theory of cognitive dissonance. When we hold two conflicting ideas in our mind, like my country is peaceful and my country killed civilians, our brain experiences discomfort. To reduce that discomfort, we unconsciously reject the idea that challenges our identity. That's why people often dismiss even well-supported evidence if it contradicts what they want to believe. Social psychologist Solomon Asch showed us how easily people conform to group opinion, even when they know it's wrong. In his famous line experiment, participants agreed with blatantly incorrect answers just because others around them did. Now imagine this effect magnified by millions on Twitter, where a false claim gets 100,000 likes before any fact check even appears. Group pressure becomes truth. And we cannot ignore Stanley Milgram's obedience studies, where people followed authority figures even when asked to harm others, just because someone in a lab coat told them to. In the context of media, the lab coat becomes the polished anchor, the national logo, the patriotic music playing behind a broadcast. When people trust the authority of legacy media, they're more likely to believe and obey, no matter how questionable the information that is presented. Lastly, Albert Bandura's social learning theory reminds us that behavior and belief are contagious. We model what we see. When the people around us share emotionally charged stories or repost misinformation, we're more likely to do it too. Not because we're malicious, but because we're wired to imitate. So no, misinformation doesn't spread because people are stupid. It spreads because they're human. Because the very psychology that helped us survive now makes us vulnerable in a digital world. And until we understand those vulnerabilities, we'll keep falling into the same traps. And that brings us to the most important part of this video, what you can do to stay grounded when the ground itself feels unstable. While this all sounds overwhelming, the good news is that awareness is the first defense. You don't need a degree in media studies to stop manipulation. You just need a few simple habits. Start by slowing down. Don't share something because it feels right. Ask yourself why it feels right and who might benefit from that feeling. Cross-check your information. If you see a claim that seems designed to provoke emotion, look for it in other outlets, especially ones with different political leanings. Be cautious with visuals. Just because a photo or video looks dramatic doesn't mean it's real or current. Reverse image search is your best friend. Most importantly, question the framing. Notice how the stories are told, not just what's being said, but also how it's being said. Are words like terror, massacre, or heroic being used to shape your perception? That is not journalism. That is storytelling. And the difference matters. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time.